Hello and welcome to another episode of TV on TV. I'm State Representative Tommy Vitolo. You're watching Brookline Interactive Group, and today is Thursday, October 15th. I've got a great guest today, Michael Alperin, an old friend of mine who has recently been named the Executive Director of the Brookline Housing Authority. And we're going to talk about housing both in Brookline and beyond. And this is a critical issue. It's always been a critical issue, one that maybe hasn't gotten all of the attention that, frankly, it requires. And we're hoping to change that at least a little bit here on Brookline Interactive Group. But first, we're going to do some news. And I got it written down right here because I can't memorize it all. As we know, Amy Barrett has been nominated to the Supreme Court, and those hearings have begun. And if anything else, it has underscored how political and partisan our judicial system has become, and in my view, is a real problem. Early voting has begun in many states across the country, both mail-in and in person, and is setting all kinds of records, really phenomenal. In Massachusetts, early voting begins on Saturday, October 17th. That's also the day that the eviction moratorium in Massachusetts expires. The work put forward by Representatives Honan and Connolly to get an eviction moratorium extension have not borne fruit, unfortunately. However, the governor has made some efforts to mitigate the incoming, perhaps disaster associated with COVID-related evictions by putting aside $100 million in Raft, which is rental assistance for families in transition. It's certainly not enough. It will help, but I believe there's more work to do here, and I believe this will be an ongoing problem. If folks haven't been working full time with unemployment assistance from the feds reduced, there's just not enough money for folks to stay housed, and it's a real problem coming, I believe. Locally, two bits of news. The first is that my daughter Angelina turned 6 today, so that's very exciting, at least if you're Angelina or her family. She celebrated by losing a tooth a few days ago, so not only is she getting the birthday mojo, she's also getting the tooth fairy mojo. But also a brief word about Halloween. The state has offered guidance, but not requirements here, and the town has essentially echoed that guidance. And so we need to acknowledge that some things are high risk and really ought to be avoided. Those things include indoor parties of any kind, indoor haunted houses, and it also includes going door to door trick-or-treating. And that stinks, but of all the things our kids are suffering through over the past 6 months, this is relatively minor, and I think we need to keep that in perspective. Outdoor activities, particularly with distance, are safer. If you're going to be at an event with some screaming, because it is Halloween, give yourself even more distance, of course, with masks. Perhaps the best thing to do is to watch a scary movie at home with your family. That's a nice, safe activity worth doing, and deal with the nightmares later. Not a nightmare, terrible transition. We're here with Michael Alperin from the Brookline Housing Authority. Michael, I'm so glad you could find some time to join us this morning. Take off your mute and say hello.
Hello, Representative Vitolo. Thanks for having me this morning.
I'm delighted you're here, Michael. Please call me Tommy. We dive right in. We don't screw around. Michael, you've been the executive director of the Brookline Housing Authority for a cup of coffee. How'd you get here? What have you been up to, and what brought you to Brookline's Housing Authority?
Well, thanks for asking, Tommy. First and foremost, I wound up at the Brookline Housing Authority because I've been a resident of Brookline for the past 6 years, and my wife and I care deeply about civic engagement in this town. But I think to answer in short, I came to this profession in a roundabout way. I started my career as a second grade teacher, and through a program called Teach for America, I was teaching many low-income students who lived in NYCHA housing in New York. And I saw firsthand that a lot of my students couldn't complete their homework because they had no heat in the winter. They had holes in their bathroom and people were shouting above and below their apartment unit. And that caused me to realize there's more to solving cycles of poverty than just education or healthcare alone. And so for the last decade, I've been working in the affordable housing field, most recently for a local private developer called Beacon Communities. And when the opportunity to apply for the role of becoming the new executive director of the Brookline Housing Authority came available, I jumped on it. And I'm really excited to serve over 2,500 families and households around this town that rely on the Brookline Housing Authority for rental support and providing themselves a safe and decent place to live and grow in this town.
Could you tell us just a little bit about what sorts of housing BHA offers? Most of us, when we think about it, we think about the larger buildings, maybe along Route 9 near Walnut Street, maybe near Com Ave, just behind Com Ave in North Brookline. But that's not all BHA is about. Can you sort of just give us a little bit of the lay of the land about what sorts of housing BHA offers?
Sure. So the BHA owns and operates about 1,000 units of housing. You, Tommy, just described probably the larger housing developments that we all think of. There's a lot of state public housing, which are family developments located near BU along Com Ave and Dummer Street and Egmont Street. There's also a lot of state public housing and family sites at High Street, down in sort of near where Cypress meets High Street in town. And other families that live right along the Route 9 corridor where Walnut Street and the firehouse sort of meet Route 9 by the Gateway East project. The Housing Authority also owns and manages a lot of senior developments in and around Coolidge Corner, primarily on Longwood Avenue, Park Street, Marion Street, Pleasant Street. And overall, this totals about 1,000 units of housing that is restricted for households earning no more than 60% of the median income. And honestly, most of the Brookline Housing Authority residents earn no more than 20% of the median income in Brookline, which means these are families that are working, one or two jobs, but they're earning the minimum wage, barely a living wage, and rely on rental support to live in these housing units. Those, just to describe to everyone, families and seniors living in Brookline Housing Authority units, they provide no more than 30% of their income towards rent and utilities. The Housing Authority, federal government, or state government pay for the remaining 70% of an individual's rent and utilities, or in many cases more than that if their income is low or even zero. In addition to the housing I just described, the Brookline Housing Authority also administers about 1,500 Section 8 and MRVP vouchers around town. And those are vouchers that help low-income households, seniors, families find housing in private developments around town. They pay a higher rental standard as long as someone uses the voucher in Brookline. They are free to go to other towns and communities, but that's rare because the rental standard on the voucher is lower. So that's another 2,000 individuals using those vouchers who again pay no more than 30% of their income, which is certified each year. And the voucher through the federal government makes up the difference to help them live in Brookline and afford Brookline rents. And I just want to mention, Tommy, actually an exciting development as part of the recent coronavirus relief and CARES Act. The Housing Authority is in the process of applying for an additional 75 vouchers through HUD for persons 55 or younger with disabilities. And we're fairly confident, since those are being awarded on a non-competitive basis, that we'll be able to have this opportunity to help another 75 households afford and live around Brookline.
So that brings us to sort of what you're getting into it, right? What's going on right now around housing affordability in Brookline? Uh, Many folks think of Brookline as strictly an affluent community. Clearly, that's not the case. But what are some of the things we should be thinking about within Brookline today with affordable housing? And then, we can sort of talk about how COVID has impacted that.
Great questions. So, I would start by saying Brookline and the greater Boston area have remained unaffordable for many. To pay no more than 30% of one's income on rent or a mortgage in and around Brookline means that you're paying well over the median wage here in town. I think there's a study from CHAPA, I forget what the acronym stands for, but it's a group that focuses on housing related issues, that we need another 35,000 housing units in the greater Boston area. And I think that translates to about another 1,500 housing units in and around Brookline in order for the cost of housing to come down enough for the median income to be able to afford rent in the area. So housing has been, before the coronavirus, a challenge for people to afford, and it continues to be so when many people have lost their jobs, have reduced hours, or need to stay at home to make sure their kids can learn in this remote learning environment. In terms of what we're seeing from our residents, there's an additional challenge. A lot of people are unable to afford their rent. The Housing Authority has recertified hundreds of its residents' incomes downwards, which allows us to bring in additional rental support from the federal or state government. But that's not enough. We are something like 6 times the number of residents are late in paying their rent compared to normal. And that's a real challenge, especially as the eviction moratorium in the state expires, as you mentioned at the top of the show, Tommy, in the coming weeks. We as the Housing Authority have no intention to proceed with evictions in the immediate term, but I know that may not be the case for all landlords in and around town, which is troubling to think about.
And so, as I mentioned, the governor has expanded the Raft program, but that's going to take a little while and certainly won't be enough. Is there anything similar in Brookline to the Raft program that maybe our viewers should know about?
Yes, is the short answer. So I think not well-known institution, but a great institution within Brookline is the Brookline Center, which provides supportive services for a lot of BHA residents and people who need counseling. One program that the Brookline Center has been running for decades and is well ahead of the Raft program and the governor in this regard is a social safety net program. It's funded in part by the Brookline Foundation and fundraising that the Brookline Center does. And that helps supplement rent for many residents in Brookline Housing Authority properties or around town who are struggling. Those funds are nowhere near deep enough to meet the need right now. So the governor's Raft program will be welcome support if we're able to attract some of those dollars to residents who need that help in Brookline. But already, if you are struggling with rent and listening to this, the Brookline Center has a program called the Social Safety Net Program, and on a case-by-case basis helps people meet their rent when in crisis.
Now, there's been in my view, a very welcome surge in interest in affordable housing, subsidized housing, as well as market rate housing that folks of low and moderate income can afford, including right here in Brookline. And I know that BHA has got some really exciting plans for what's coming next. What projects or developments or renovations BHA's got up its sleeve. Can you tell us a little bit about those?
Absolutely. And first and foremost, I would echo your comment. It's been incredible to see the surge in interest in housing related issues both in Brookline and around the Commonwealth. I think there's a lot of great ideas out there that start to attack this problem through zoning reforms, through inclusionary development policies, through additional dwelling units or micro units. There's a lot of interesting ideas that hopefully can help address the problem. In terms of the BHA, there's a federal program called RAD, which allows us to convert legacy public housing into a higher paying Section 8 contract, PBV contract, it's known in the HUD world as. And that contract allows a bank or mass housing to finance real meaningful mortgages on public housing that was not previously possible because there's a guaranteed income stream over the next 15 years. The BHA uses those additional mortgage dollars and low-income housing tax credits that are administered by the state but are part of the federal tax code and other state sources to redevelop its public housing. So we've already underway, people around town may have seen the construction at 61 Park Street or 90 Longwood Street. Those are in place, they're called occupied unit rehabs, where we are renovating the entire building, new bathrooms, new kitchens for residents, energy efficient upgrades where we're going all electric with our energy systems, LED lighting, modern community spaces. And that's an example of what we hope to accomplish at many of the existing BHA buildings around town. A little more exciting in some ways is the town meeting recently voted to allocate some inclusionary development dollars from the Well Tower project on Fisher Hill to the Brookline Housing Authority's Colonel Floyd development on Marion Street. And we hired an architecture firm called Davis Square Architects to study tearing down the buildings and replacing all the 60 units of existing housing, plus adding at least an additional 40 units of housing. We hope to accomplish more on the site in a brand new state-of-the-art building that'll have much more modern common spaces, will have meet the needs of today's energy codes and safety codes, and provide at least 100, if not more, seniors with a really great place to live right in the center of Coolidge Corner. So we hope to continue leveraging the RAD program to do similar things to all of the existing public housing stock in and around Brookline.
Now, has the BHA thought about how maybe some design changes are necessary or appropriate as we think about COVID and the impact of COVID on our residents, seniors, and others? Can you imagine maybe Colonel Floyd will look a little bit differently than you were thinking a year ago, or the town was thinking a year ago?
Yeah, so I think it's still too soon in some ways. We ask this question of our architects every day, as we redevelop and redo buildings, what can we do different to make sure we're planning for this pandemic as well as any future pandemics? Health and safety are my #1 priority right now as executive director of the BHA, of all our residents and all our staff. In terms of Colonel Floyd, I think some ideas that have come up are making sure there's private balconies for all the residents so everyone can access outdoor space in a private way rather than a community setting if we need to continue social distancing. There are some ideas about UV lighting that kill bacteria and viral particles that we are provisioning electricity, both at our 90 Longwood development and at Colonel Floyd in the future. And I think we're just listening and learning. I think whatever healthcare experts tell us, we will try to address as much as that's financially feasible. It sounds like greater airflow, HVAC systems are becoming more important, and we're trying to incorporate all the best thinking possible. We have recently met both with Brookline Can, Hebrew Senior Life, Two Life Communities, and our current service provider, Springwell, to have a couple visioning sessions about what seniors need in the age of coronavirus, future pandemics, and just in general, so that we can be a best-in-class housing provider at Colonel Floyd in all of our developments. And I think in addition to learning from these experts around town, we'll be engaging our residents, we'll be engaging the community, because there's a lot of brain trust in this town that can provide great ideas about how we can best serve our seniors and the public at large.
I want to switch gears a little bit. Most folks don't have any sense for how incredibly complex the regulations and financing of subsidized housing are. It is, I mean, it's bizarre. To get a new development built, it's something like 10 or 12 different funding streams, and they all have different tax statuses and underwriting requirements, and just notebooks and notebooks and notebooks full of documentation. Surely it's not the most efficient way, but it seems to be the American way. Can you give us some sense, maybe for changes you imagine on the horizon, either at the state level or the federal level, with respect to funding housing, with respect to operating housing? What's coming down the pipe?
Absolutely. I think you described it well, Tommy. We work in an alphabet soup of funding programs and sources to make affordable housing happen. Just for reference, this used to be a lot easier because HUD's federal budget was a lot larger. HUD's budget was 4 times the size it was on inflation adjusted dollars, just as recently as the mid 90s. And so we've chronically underfunded public and affordable housing, which has led to these developers needing to grab onto 5, 10, 15 sources of small pots of money from the Federal Home Loan Bank, the state, federal sources, just to make a medium-sized development happen. So I think today, at the state level, a lot has happened in the last year or two that's really meaningful. There was a bond bill that was passed that helped support additional affordable housing in the form of state low-income housing tax credits, replenished a bunch of state sources that are administered by DHCD, and the governor allocated some sale proceeds from a building in Boston, the old GE site, to create a workforce housing fund at Mass Housing that's a lot larger and more meaningful than it used to be. And that, by the way, for everyone listening, is one of the unique sources in Massachusetts and around the country, in that it helps support not only low-income housing, but middle-income housing between 60 and 140% of median income, which is teachers, firemen, police officers, that live and work around our towns and cities. So I think a lot of the discussion at the state level has turned more to zoning reform and the housing choice bill. There's also some funds in the economic development bill that this fall are being worked on by the joint committee between the House and Senate. And Tommy, you might be able to speak more to where those discussions stand. At the federal level, it really depends on what happens with the Senate and what a Biden or Trump administration, depending on who gets elected, proposes for HUD's budgets. There are 2 funding streams federally: the low-income housing tax credits I referenced that are through the Treasury, and a bunch of sources like CDBG grants that are administered through HUD, and other public housing subsidy, Section 8 subsidy through HUD. It is the hope of the housing community that a Biden administration comes to pass, and that there may be more Senate Democrats that allow for more funding of affordable housing. When the last stimulus passed in 2008, there were a lot of additional resources pumped into affordable housing to help offset some economic troubles. There's always demand for affordable housing. It's an infrastructure asset, and so investing in affordable housing now, while federal debt is cheap and while we need jobs created, is a real opportunity for this country that hopefully comes to pass depending on the results of this election.
Michael, I think you put a fine point on it at the end there. So in my view, we should be doing housing because it's the right thing to do. But if that doesn't get some people there, doing it now because interest is practically zero, debt interest is practically zero, and we need jobs and we need some modern infrastructure. If that's what works, great. We're just about at the end of the show. I want to remind folks of a few things. This is me. Let's see if we can get this to actually show up. Here we go. Tommy Vitolo, 617-872-8921. Tommy.vitolo@mahouse.gov. Call me if there's anything I can do for you. It's challenging times, it's complicated times, and if you're struggling with something and I can be of help, don't hesitate. Give me a call. That's my cell phone. Just call it. I promise I turn the ringer off when I go to bed. So please don't be shy about reaching out. Of course, November 3rd is election day, but really we're in election month. Early voting begins this Saturday in Massachusetts. In Brookline, that means you can go to the town hall beginning this Saturday. And if you Google Brookline Town Clerk or DuckDuckGo, Brookline Town Clerk, as it were, you can get the times that the polling place is open at Town Hall, 333 Washington Street. If you've got a mail-in ballot, you can also hand deliver it to the box at 333 Washington Street, 24 hours a day. It's under surveillance and it's locked down. And that allows you to make sure that your ballot gets back to the town. Of course, you can put it in the mail, but if you're going to do that, you need to do it soon. We want to make sure it arrives in time to be counted. And you can always vote on November 3rd, Tuesday, November 3rd, from 7 a.m. until 8 p.m. That is election day, every state in the country. And it's shaping up to be quite a big election. Of course, the consequences are significant for many things, including but not limited to the future of affordable housing in our community, in our Commonwealth, and in our country. So, Michael, thank you again for joining me today and for sharing some of your thoughts about housing and the BHA. And we wish you nothing but success as you embark on this journey as BHA's executive director.
Well, Tommy, thank you so much for having me. And I just want to echo your sentiment. Please vote, everyone. It's really important for the issues of affordable housing, for the issues of everything we care about around Brookline and this Commonwealth. So go out and get to those polling stations and get those ballots in. Thanks, Tommy.
You bet. This is another episode of TV on TV. I'm still State Representative Tommy Vitolo. You're still watching Brookline Interactive Group, and we'll see you next week. So long, everyone.